Time. And with me here, Karen Bradley, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, formerly Secretary of State for Culture and Sport. The Shadow Treasury Minister, Clive Lewis, who was on Labour's front bench, resigned to vote against Article 50 triggering Brexit, and is now back on the front bench. Richard Walker, Managing Director of the frozen food chain Iceland, one of the UK's top 10 supermarkets. Until recently President of the John Lewis Partnership and one of the country's leading campaigners on race and equality, Trevor Phillips. And the talk radio presenter and columnist, Julia Hartley-Brewer. A reminder at home, if you want to get stuck into these arguments, you can do it on social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and our hashtag is BBCQT. Our first question tonight from Louvain Newell, please. Louvain.
In trying to please all of the people, has Theresa May only succeeded in pleasing none?
Right. Clive Lewis.
She's certainly not pleased Parliament, that's for sure. I was there the day that she came to make the announcement last week on the withdrawal agreement, and I think it took something like 70 minutes before there was one supporting statement from her own side on this. So it's a mess. We understand that. I think that what Theresa May has done, I remember after the Brexit referendum, I went around my constituency in Norwich South, I spoke to people, and I was really impressed by, it's a Remain seat, I was really impressed by people who said to me, you know what, fair cop gov, we lost, and we need to get behind, make sure we get the best deal for this country. And I was proud of my constituents, because I thought, you know what, that's what it is, that British sense of fair play, we lost that election. But what Theresa May did was she then alienated so many of my constituents by first the Mansion House speech in the Red Lines, where she fed red meat to her extreme Brexiteers. And then she called it an unnecessary general election so she could punch through her own specific way forward on Brexit without bringing the country together. She had an opportunity to bring the country together, and she has comprehensively failed. And what she has done in my constituency is she has driven people further apart. That's what she's done with her politicking that she's done. And I think it's only the Labour Party that now can actually make some progress on this and bring the country back together. I don't like living in a country. I don't know anyone else, but I don't want to live in a country where we're at each other's throats like we are on this. It's getting tiresome. I think most people are sick and tired of this now. We want it resolved, and I think Theresa May should step aside for the Labour Party, let us sort this out, and have a relationship with Europe that works for everyone in this country, not just her hard Brexiteers.
She says she has a good Brexit, which is within our grasp. You don't agree?
I mean, what? Come on. I mean, sorry, David, but I'm afraid to say, you look at Parliament, do you think this deal is going to get through Parliament? I don't think it is. It's failed our 6 tests. It's not going to get through Parliament. She's in real trouble. The country's in real trouble. She's let us down. She spent 2 years navel-gazing, arguing with her own party. We've got a document that's come out today on the future relationship, which is waffle and piffle, and we're in a mess. And it's because Theresa May has messed up these negotiations. She has messed up any ability to bring this country together.
All right.
And that's why we're in the mess we're in.
Richard Walker.
I think in life you have players and you have commentators. And I think she's played the game with dignity and with tenacity. And this isn't a perfect deal. It's not going to please everyone. 60 million people, you get 60 million different opinions. I voted to leave, and it doesn't give me everything that originally I hoped for. However, I think this is a good deal that's worth taking. It's a compromise, like any deal, but it's a compromise that takes back as much control as we can possibly expect, while still keeping ourselves open for business with our biggest trading partner. And finally, and importantly, I think it keeps us on good terms with the EU when we're about to start the biggest negotiation of a free trade agreement.
OK. Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Yes, she's absolutely not pleasing anyone. It's very difficult to find anyone other than, I think, probably Philip May, who agrees with the Prime Minister. The bit I don't really understand is when people like you, Clive, talk about how, you know, it's such a shame the country's so divided. If people like you hadn't voted as an MP to allow the British people to have their say in a EU referendum and then voted against triggering Article 50, the outcome of the referendum, if people like you had accepted the outcome, perhaps we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now.
Can I tell you why I voted against Article 50. It wasn't on the principle of voting for Article 50. It was basically because what Theresa May had done with the bill that was before Parliament on Article 50, she had set such narrow parameters on what was acceptable, what wasn't. On rights of EU citizens. There were so many areas in Article 50 which were wrong and fundamentally wrong. And look at the mess we're in now. There was no need for her to start that process when she did.
Yeah, OK, let's not go back that far. Let's go to
I really didn't get a chance to have my say.
Don't bring him in. Give your answer.
My thing is, this is all supposed to be a compromise. I don't know why we're having a compromise. The whole point of having an EU referendum was because the Parliament didn't represent what voters wanted. We know that from the outcome of the referendum. But also because there wasn't a compromise position. If you're two people in a marriage, one of you wants to leave and one of you doesn't want the other person to leave, there isn't a compromise of sort of, well, I'll have my left foot in the door and my right foot out. There couldn't be a compromise. So when Leave won, then there wasn't a compromise to be done between Remain and Leave.
What about what she's offering, though?
What she's offering? She promised us a deal that was better than no deal. She's given us a bad deal that is worse than no deal and certainly worse than even remaining in the EU.
OK, worse than remaining.
Worse.
All right.
The whole point of voting to leave, for people like me who voted for leave, was that we would take back control of our own laws and the right to make free trade deals and to set, you know, our own tariffs and the like. She's taken all of that away.
So as of today,
we won't even at the moment, we have the unilateral right to leave the EU. Under this deal, we won't even have the right to leave the customs union unless the 27 other states say that's OK.
OK. Karen Bradley.
Well, it probably won't come as a surprise that I disagree with Julia, because I think this deal does exactly that. It does deliver on taking back control of our laws, our borders and our money. And I want to see the United Kingdom leave the European Union. I want to make sure we deliver on the result of the referendum. But I want to do that in an orderly way. I want to do that in a way that protects jobs, that makes sure that we protect all that's good about our relationship with our friends in Europe and continue to trade with our friends in Europe, but gives us the ability to strike trade deals globally, and that's what this deal does. Now, I agree with you, Julia. It's not perfect. There are compromises there, but anybody who's been in any negotiation will know that you don't get everything you want.
What don't you like about it?
Well, I don't like the fact that the backstop doesn't have a unilateral exit clause. However, I think the protections that have been put in place for the backstop for Northern Ireland are such that we will either never go into the backstop, or if we do, there is no way we will be in it for any length of time. It will be a very short period of time because it'd be so desperately uncomfortable.
But the EU will decide whether we can leave it or not.
This is a mutual decision. We have arbitration processes.
It's a mutual decision, so they get to decide as well as us.
Processes.
So we don't get to decide.
No sovereignty, that's not
and we have processes that we can get out of it. We can get out of it by an alternative method to deal with the border on the island of Ireland. We can get out of it by extending the implementation period. There are plenty of protections that have been built in. And I think, if you'll forgive me, David, that the point here is I want to see us deliver on the referendum and leave the European Union. I want to do it with a deal. This is the deal on the table. Not accepting this deal means that you are voting for chaos. Okay. And I don't think that that is what the British people want.
All right, we'll come to you in a minute, but just before we do that, you've got 88 MPs saying they won't back the deal, including the DUP. What's going to happen? It's never going to get through the House of Commons.
Well, I think let's get through the Council on Sunday. Let's get the agreements in place. Let's look at this in the round, and that's what people need to do. They need to look at the whole thing, the 585 pages. I've read them. I hope everybody else on the panel has. They need to look at the draft of the political declaration for the future relationship, which sets out an enormous amount of detail. Things like we will make sure that we can exchange data. We will have security cooperation. We will leave the common fisheries policy.
But you've told that, presumably, to the 88 MPs who still say they don't want to vote for it.
I think they need to go and speak to their constituents. They need to hear from people.
Does the former Brexit Secretary not understand the deal? Does he just not understand it?
People are entitled to take a different view on this, but my view on this...
But if it's in black and white, how could he take a different view?
My view on this...
We're either leaving the European Union, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, leaving the auspices of the European Court of Justice, or we're not. Why does the former Brexit Secretary think that we're not?
Well, people can take a different opinion on it, but that is my opinion. And we are legally and absolutely leaving the Court of Justice. We are going to take back our laws, borders and money.
Wait. Let's just go to Trevor Phillips, and I come to members of the audience. Trevor Phillips.
David, there's a part of me that is kind of crying, how long can this go on? We have to get this settled. Now, I voted Remain. I didn't vote Remain because I love the old unelected men who run things in Brussels. I didn't vote Remain because, you know, I want to be bossed around by Germans or French. I voted Remain because I look around the world and I think the big challenges, technology, the size and the weight and the influence of Facebook and all these companies, the rise of China, the population explosion in the Middle East and Africa. These are huge issues, and we as a country cannot deal with them on our own.
Why?
In the end,
why not?
Because you need weight to compete. You need weight to compete with that level.
Aren't we the sixth largest economy in the world?
Let me give you an example, David.
Yeah?
The Chinese have started 600 projects, about $1 billion apiece in Africa and in Latin America. They are winning friends. We just don't have the firepower to compete with that. That is why I voted to Remain. Now, I lost. We lost. And I think we have to accept that. So my answer is, how do we now deal with those huge challenges? And to be honest, this deal, you know, to paraphrase Churchill, this is probably the worst deal in the world, except for all the other deals that were on offer. I think we have to get through this. We have to get as close to where I would like to be, close to that block as possible, and then get on with dealing with these big challenges. It may be great fun for everybody to continue having this argument about clause this and clause that, but there are going to be 1 million jobs lost in retail because of competition from abroad. That's the problem we've got to deal with.
What would you like Labour to do? What would you like Corbyn to do?
What? Have a view.
We do.
I would just be happy if they had a view.
Yes, we do.
And vote for the deal that May has produced?
I would just like to know what they actually think. I would vote for this deal because I think there are more important things for our Parliament to be getting on and dealing with. And as a business person, what I really need now is some stability and certainty, so I know where we can invest our money. Can we hire people next year? This is about jobs.
Right. Yeah. Richard?
I'd absolutely agree with that. You know, the time for academic arguments are over. This is about real people's lives and jobs. Yeah. There is no other deal. We've reached the end of the road. This is the only deal in town. And business needs certainty. We want to invest. We want to budget. We want to plan. And we have to take this deal because it gives us a roadmap for the future.
OK. Clive Lewis, you heard what Trevor said about Labour.
So that's right.
In
three sentences, a new permanent relationship with the customs union and a say over trade deals. We want a strong single market relationship for both goods and services, which Theresa May's deal doesn't give, only gives on goods. And we want guarantees for workers' rights and environmental protections. No, your deal doesn't do that. Okay. That's what we want to see.
Clive, that's the fantasy. Merkel, Juncker and Barnier have all said the door is closed.
Yeah. So
it is this deal or no deal.
So no, here's a difference. Here's the thing, because if there's a change of government, then we know that Article 50 is a political decision, and that can be put back. We can get a deal. A Labour Party can get a deal that is far better.
Whatever makes you think that?
Oh, so Jeremy,
this is the thing. Everyone thinks they know.
Everybody else in the EU is just going to roll over the minute he comes over the horizon.
Time after time.
Come on.
People have been proven wrong time after time. No one knows what's going to happen. What I do know is that there is an impasse, and it's only the Labour Party that can actually create enough of an agreement to actually bring both sides together.
Let's hear members of our audience
it's far better than the Conservatives.
The woman in the second row there. Okay, let's hear from members of our audience, and if the panel want to comment on what they say one by one, that'd be good. Yes.
Hello. So basically, I enjoy Theresa May. I have respect for her, and she's got a goal of what she wants. But what really annoys me is how last week the cabinet were saying, oh yeah, I backed this deal, then two leave, then some of the what's it called, the backbenches, they're going, oh, I don't agree with it, but you voted Theresa May to be the Prime Minister, to get us out and leave the EU. And what really annoys me is that she's got this goal and nobody's backing her, when actually we've got 4 months left to leave the EU and you are arguing against each other when actually you need to go with what Theresa May is saying.
But that's because she's in breach of her own manifesto.
All right, and you, sir, over there.
Said
Hold
she
on,
would
Julia.
do certain things, and she hasn't stuck to her own manifesto.
I said we'd hear from members of the audience. Let's do that, and then I'll come back to you. Yes.
Julia, I'm absolutely amazed that you've changed direction. I've listened to you many times on Question Time, and your views have always been leave and support and knocking the Remainers. Now, all of a sudden, you don't want a deal. I never hear you never said tonight, if the deal doesn't take place, what will we do? You never turn round and say, second referendum then? You won't agree with that.
No. I would love to have a good deal, and I think if we'd had someone who wasn't a Remainer negotiating, we would have had a good deal.
But you don't know what... You've got no chance of going back and getting a good deal. So what's your alternative?
I'm more than happy with no deal.
You give me the impression you're supporting...
More than happy.
Well, if there's no deal, you're telling me you're very much supporting getting Labour back into power.
Yep.
I'm not. I don't like the idea that it's going to be automatically chaos. There doesn't have to be a general election if Theresa May's government falls. I would like Theresa May to leave Number 10 because she has lied repeatedly to voters, Leave voters, Tory voters, her own backbenches, her own cabinet.
The woman up there on the right.
The economic consequences of a no deal would be catastrophic because we're not ready for it. As business are not ready.
Hold on, panel. I asked you to listen to the audience. Don't argue with each other all the time. The woman up there on the top right. You can pick up on what the audience says one by one. Yes, you.
I'm a Labour voter and I'm a Remainer. If Labour were not going to give me what particularly I wanted, which was a second referendum, they need to get behind Theresa May. This is what's on the table now for the security of our country and the young people of our country. I'm a teacher. OK, you've got to support this deal moving forward.
Clive Lewis?
No, I think... What we were led to be, what Theresa May wants us to believe, that it's a binary choice, it's her way or the highway or a hard Brexit. But even Amber Rudd, just the other day, has already said that no deal isn't an option. Parliament won't let that happen. And we've been quite clear. If that deal is voted down, which is highly likely, we would try to push for a general election. And people can scoff, but who knows what's going to happen? Theresa May's in meltdown. I've just been working on a finance bill where Labour basically wrote part of the government's finance bill from the budget because the DUP has collapsed and its vote is no longer there. This is a minority administration which is not stable. And the last point is this.
No, I'm chairing this. Let me ask you questions. Are you in favour of a second vote by the public? You did say at one point that whatever Labour came up with. Do you still agree that you give a second vote?
So we've got a sequence. If we can't get a general election, then all options are on the table, including a public vote. And that's something that our policy is quite clear on. So I think we're in a situation where we will push for a general election.
What's the question? What's the question?
That's a hypothetical for Parliament to decide. That's basically it. So
a second referendum, isn't it?
But no, wait a minute. Our position is quite clear. If we can't push for a general election, we will have a public vote.
We've already had a public vote. It was in 2016.
Your thing was that if you had an election and a Labour government and you renegotiated, you would then put it to the public again.
That's hypothetical.
That's what you said.
But that's hypothetical, David.
Well, why did you say it was only hypothetical?
This is a situation that we're in now.
All right.
We've got a sequence.
I'll come back to you. What is it you want? And then I'll come to you, Karen. Yes.
If we have now discovered that what we all, Leave and Remain, thought we were voting for is not what we're going to get, shouldn't you be pushing for a second vote. Shouldn't
Okay.
people have that choice?
Right.
Isn't that the essence?
Let's go back. Okay, let's go back to Karen Bradley.
Change your mind.
Karen Bradley, yes, I'll come to you, sir. Karen Bradley.
Well, on the second vote, I don't happen to agree with one. I think that we had a vote, we asked the people what they thought, and the people came out in larger numbers than they do in general elections or anything else, and they voted to leave the European Union. And I want to deliver on that. But I just say to Clive, this is the time to put party politics aside. Yeah. This is the time to not play political games.
You've been doing that for 2 years, though.
This is in the national interest that we get the deal that is on the table and we move on together as the United Kingdom.
What happens if the Prime Minister can't get this deal through the House of Commons? What do you think? He's been talking hypothetical. What is your view about what should happen then?
I'm focusing on, first of all, getting the Council and getting the agreement to the deal on Sunday.
Would it lead to the Prime Minister resigning if she didn't get it through the House of Commons?
And then focusing on the deal and explaining
to people. Would it mean the Prime Minister would have to resign if she didn't get this deal, which he's been working on for nearly 2 years?
There's a lot... Look, the point here is that the public... I was at the Leak Christmas lights switching on last week. I didn't meet a single person who didn't say to me, just get on with it and do this. That's what the public wants.
If the Prime Minister doesn't get her deal through the House of Commons, does she have to resign?
Let's just get on with getting the vote for the deal. What I want to see is this deal pass through Parliament and then we can get on with delivering the Brexit that people voted for.
Man in the red pullover there in the second row from the back.
Mine, yes.
Yes, you, quickly.
Right, the real thing is you've all sat on your backsides, hoped it to go away since 2016, and basically you hoped nothing had happened. And now you're stuck with egg on your face, just scrabbling around to try and find something.
OK.
And the only one giving a centre ground is Theresa May.
So what do you think they should do? What do you want to see happen?
Well, start off, until you actually know what Europe says, you haven't a clue. You need to get an answer back from Europe. It needs to go to Parliament, and they decide. But having a second referendum won't solve anything. OK, and you... They'll just do what they did before.
Thank you. And the man in the black shirt there, you, sir.
Yeah, I think it's sort of going back to this point. I find it extremely ironic how we had Theresa May saying no deal is better than a bad deal. Yeah. Yet here she is parading this bad deal that, let's be honest, is getting nowhere fast. That deal is not going through the House of Commons. It's not even got past the ERG. It's not going past anyone. It's a dodgy deal.
What's going to happen?
What I think is going to happen, we're going to see Theresa May down at the job centre. I think she's going to be done for. She's done for.
And you in the fourth row there. The woman in the fourth row.
What does Clive think Jeremy Corbyn can do that Theresa May can't do?
It's a hypothetical. No, what do you think?
Well,
brief.
Briefly, we don't have the ideological hang-ups on the customs union, a permanent customs union. We're happy with that. Because we don't have that, we can actually put a deal in place that protects jobs and puts jobs first. I think that's the right way forward. Now, clearly, if Theresa May can't deliver her Brexit, then there's a genuine need, I think, for a general election. And that's where people will get a choice and a say in who leads this now and who actually negotiates this. It's quite clear. It's quite clear.
But at the last general election, 85% of people voted for a party that promised to deliver Brexit. Yes. The Prime Minister said again and again she would deliver Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn said he would deliver Brexit. 67% of the constituents of Karen Bradley voted for Brexit.
Can we just come back?
65, I'm sorry.
Could we just get back to reality? I'm actually a great fan of Clive's, and I'm a member of his party. I hope one day he will be a contender for leadership of our party. But they send him out here to peddle this utter fantasy that, we're going to get a general election, Jeremy Corbyn will win it, Jeremy Corbyn will then go and tell Angela Merkel, I want it all reopened, in spite of the fact that everybody in Europe has said, that's it, it's this deal or no deal. Now, this is just ridiculous. And this kind of infighting is holding millions of people whose jobs depend on us deciding what we're going to do hostage. It may be great fun for politicians and the media, but it is miserable for this country. If Parliament can't get the job, and by the way, you guys, for the last year, you've only had one job to do, and you couldn't get that done. Now, if you don't do it, then we'll have a second referendum, but the question will be this deal or no deal.
Okay,
and that's where the country will be.
Mr. Walker?
No, Eddie, with regards to a second referendum, you know, I keep coming back to the fact that business needs certainty. That would just kick the can down the road and we'd all be sat here rowing for another 6-12 months. So I don't think it's an option, especially considering that we voted to leave in the first place. And finally, what would that do to the person who feels dispossessed with the Westminster elite? I think it would be the biggest own goal for the politicians to hold a second referendum.
OK, and since you voted... Since you voted to leave, I'd just like you to hear John Pugh's question. Can we go to John Pugh and have your question?
Does Mrs May's Brexit mean remain?
Can you just say it again, because I was speaking over you?
Does Mrs May's Brexit mean remain?
In other words, is what she's got on offer, in effect, remaining? Yeah. Richard?
Well, I don't think it does. I mean, what we have is a withdrawal agreement, so it's not the end deal, but the withdrawal agreement states an intention that we will seek to regain our trade policy and yet will try and keep as close alignment to the customs union as possible.
Is that what you wanted when you voted Brexit?
Well, I think the whole point is to go off and sign free trade agreements, or else there was no
But do you feel
point.
the hand of the EU is still going to be on British trade deals and on British decision-making?
I do not paint the EU as some pantomime villain, some scurrilous institution that's going to, you know, deliberately try and keep us within a backstop. It's not in their best interests, and it's certainly not in our best interests. And, you know, the intention, the declaration that was discussed this evening, I think that lays out good intention on both sides to show good faith in improving on the terms of the transition agreement that we've now agreed.
OK, the man in the check blue shirt there, there are three of you in check blue shirts, the one on the right there, you, sir.
Right. Yeah. I think what we really need is a parliament that represents the people. At the last election, you all said you were going to leave, and we voted for you, but nobody in Parliament seems to want to. The majority seem to want to remain in the EU.
They offered a referendum, you mean, or that they said...
No, at the last election.
Right.
Both parties stood on a mandate of leaving the EU, and they seem to have changed their mind. Remain seems to have crept back into the options.
So this question of John Pugh's, Karen Bradley, would you answer it? What she's negotiated actually means remaining in the EU?
No, it absolutely...
There are too many links left. There's not the clear-cut, finished, goodbye.
No, it doesn't mean we're remaining in the EU. We've got to remember we're undoing 45 years of entwined economic and regulatory relationship, and that's not easy. This is the biggest demerger in history, and that's not an easy thing to do. And a lot of the focus has been on the withdrawal agreement. And let's be clear, whatever the future relationship, we need a withdrawal agreement. And that withdrawal agreement has got an implementation period so that we see just one change for businesses, one change for people, so that things don't keep changing, so it's as easy and as orderly to leave the European Union as possible. But let's be clear, we will leave the European Union on the 29th of March next year, and the political declaration is also clear. We will end free movement. We will have an independent trade policy. This is what we're agreeing with the European Union for our future relationship.
Why haven't you been able to persuade so many of your backbenchers and indeed your cabinet, fellow cabinet members, that this is the case?
As I said to you earlier, people are entitled to take a different opinion
I'm asking
on this.
why you... No, I know they are. We all know that. The question is, what is it in the deal that they don't like, that you find
Well,
OK?
I think Trevor made the point that actually this is about detail. It's about technical detail. And I fully respect why people are exercised by it. But I say to everybody, the technical details should not stop us getting this great relationship with Europe, not turning our back on 45% of our business. No business would turn its back on its customer that's 45% of its business, but giving us the opportunity to get those trade deals around the world. And Clive's proposal for a customs union doesn't allow us to do that.
Yes, it does.
So I say to people, and I say to my colleagues in the House of Commons, I know you have concerns. No deal was ever going to be everything everybody wanted. But look at this in the round, look at everything that's involved, look at the proposals for the future relationship, the framework that we've got fleshed out today, that will go to the 27 other countries in the EU on Sunday. And let's bear in mind, we're dealing with 27 other countries and we're getting a deal with them. And this is the best deal. This is a deal that will deliver on the Brexit result, and it will deliver for the United Kingdom.
You say your colleagues who disagree with you, senior backbenchers, senior members of the Cabinet who quit, people who quit after the Chequers and all that, they're just dealing in technicalities. They don't sound to me as if they're talking technicalities.
I'm not saying
they sound to me as if they're talking about a really substantial, in their view, substantial difference between what the country voted for at the referendum and what Theresa May is offering.
I'm saying that It's not technicalities, it's things they feel very strongly about, and I fully respect that. But I say look at the deal as a whole and look at what this means for the future of our country and put the national interest first and vote for the deal.
Jacob Rees-Mogg's never going to do that, is he? For him, this is an article of religious faith. It's 500 years. He would have been throwing witches in the pond over this. He is not interested in the detail. He wants to win, and he wants to see the people who are on the other side humiliated. I, by the way, think one of the problems about this debate is that everybody who gets passionate about it treats the people on the other side as though they are morally deficient. People who argued for leave made a judgment, like I made a judgment, and I think they are perfectly decent people. They made a different judgment. The country went with them, not with me. Can't we just get back to having the debate on that level, rather than saying that person over there is basically evil, wicked...
You just insulted a Leave campaigner. You literally insulted a Leave campaigner, questioned his motives, and then said, can we all be nice?
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
I didn't question his motives. What I said is, for him, this is not about the details. In a way, it's what David said. It is, for him, a much bigger thing than that. And he will never be convinced by a deal.
It's an issue of principle, yes.
He will never be convinced by a deal.
I have to say, I can't remember the debates leading up to the referendum being particularly gentle. They seem to me to be ferocious from the very start. The man with the beard there, and then we'll move on to another question, maybe.
Yeah, I just think the whole thing has turned into an absolute pantomime of party politics. I really do. And I think it is so rich and ironic of Clive to sit there talking about piffle and waffle and cloud cuckoo land when Labour have stuck to their 6 tests which were engineered in the first place because they knew nothing would ever be able to meet them. So, frankly, I think we've just seen across the board the whole reason the general election was called last year was to try and deal with the fact that we had Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP playing party politics with whether or not Theresa May had mandate, and I think that carries on right up to today.
Okay. We're halfway through our time, and though Brexit occupies all our minds, I think we should go on to another question. Before we do, we're going to be in Penzance next Thursday, and the week after that in Bishop Stortford, and on the screen are the details of how to apply. If you'd like to come to Penzance or Bishop Stortford, do use that. I'll give the detail in greater detail at the end. I want to have this question, please, from Sancha Barker.
Is Denise Coates, Bet365, an astute businesswoman whose success we should celebrate, or a business taking advantage of vulnerable people?
A business taking advantage of vulnerable people. Well, Denise Coates achieved the fantastic figure of increasing her annual salary by £48 million to £265 million. It's just emerged. Trevor Phillips, what do you feel about Denise Coates and her salary? Perhaps you don't feel anything about it.
Well, it's an extraordinary sum of money. It's even more than I think you earn, David. I come from a Methodist family, and it is in my instinct to disapprove of gambling. I think I've done one sweepstake in my life. But this lady sold, I think, a business she inherited, a small business, and she bet it all, so to speak, on online. It was the smartest possible thing to do. She has run a decent business. She has she's run the business well. She pays her employees. As I understand it, she pays her taxes. One of the things that I would say is that I will always give her licence, because one of the things we don't have enough of in this country is women bosses and women leaders. And so, from my point of view, I can't see any big reason to criticise her. We can have our views about the gambling industry, but it is legal, and she has done it, as far as I understand it, properly. And if I were going to have a go at big company bosses, there's 100 people in front of her for me to have a go at, starting with Mr. Phillips.
How close do you come, Richard Walker, to this kind of figure?
Could only dream of that amount of money, and it is an extortionate amount of money, and I think that obviously does raise emotions around it. But I suppose it's about value for money. And if you're someone who's started from nothing, who risked everything, maybe put your house on the line, and have grown a business that has paid a lot of money in taxes, employs a lot of people and helps flow wealth through society, then that's a good thing. If you're Carillion and you're a boss who bankrupted the company and ran off with the loot, that's not value for money. So I think we have to separate those two things.
And does it matter to you that there's a report, for instance, that nearly 500,000 children under the age of 16 now gamble regularly, that children are encouraged to gamble by exactly this kind of Bet365
It is concerning,
presence?
and it was exactly what I was going to come on to. I mean, gambling within itself, there are clearly some issues. Now, this particular company, I'm not sure what types of gambling they're engaged with, but obviously the statistics were shocking around the amount of kids that are addicted to gambling because they're being deliberately targeted. And this is where I think the industry needs way more safeguards and controls in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. The Chancellor, you know, rowing back on minimum bets on high street terminals, unacceptable, and I'm glad he backpedalled and has now implemented that. One final thing, business should be a force for good and pay tax. This company's domiciled in Gibraltar. I don't know its full tax arrangements, but so long as businesses as entities are paying their fair share to society, then I think if the boss is delivering value for money and acting ethically, then that's fine.
OK. Karen Bradley.
Well, it does seem an extraordinary amount of money. Difficult to comprehend how anybody is worth that, but it's a private company. It has no it's not publicly listed. There are quite clear rules about publicly listed companies, but for private companies, they're allowed to pay their directors as they see fit. But I do think it does bring focus onto the online gambling industry. And when I was Culture Secretary, we were going through the gambling review, which led to the £2, the reduction to £2 of stakes on fob teas. We were also looking at the advertising of gambling on television and others, and we've just had the Gambling Commission report on that, which makes for very interesting reading. And I think also the focus then on the online and the fact that, you know, we do need safeguards in place because children have smartphones and children can access things on the internet that their parents often don't know they're doing. And this rise and this numbers about the number of children that we see gambling, the access to this one click away is something that absolutely needs to be looked at and needs to be looked at quickly. And I know the government is taking this seriously. In my old department, in digital culture, media and sport.
Digital culture. But nobody was suggesting that these gambling companies like Bet365 go out to get kids to gamble. I mean, it's just that its presence there means that they easily can. Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Yes, I find gambling quite scary. I'm in my heart just sort of a bit scared by the idea of people being addicted to this. As a journalist and as a radio host, I've spoken to so many people who've had gambling addictions, people who've come home to find that their husband and you remortgaged their house twice and the bailiffs were there, lost everything, people who'd lost their children, their partners, their parents to suicide from gambling addiction. And it's a nasty, nasty thing in gambling addiction. And I think the deregulation of gambling, I think it was 2005 under Tony Blair, was a massive disaster. I'm all for Denise Coates. She's run a business, set it up herself, she can pay herself £1 billion a year if that's what she brings value to the company. No business of mine. I'd love it if perhaps the feministas who complain about the gender pay gap might actually complain about the men not being paid enough just this once. Clearly it's sexism in the business. But I do fundamentally have a concern that we just have far too much gambling. The advertising of gambling constantly through sport, targeted at children, I think a lot of the time in terms of making it, saying it's normal and saying it's fun. And I think we are probably heading down a route that's going to end up with quite a lot more regulation than we've got now.
Yes, back then.
In relation to Denise Coates and what she earns, I actually worked for Bet365 for 4 years. During my time there, I cared not a jot for what she earned. I cared about whether I was treated well as an employee, and I was for the entirety of my time there. She is a very, very hard-working woman. She deserves every bit of success that she's got. With regards children and gambling, as a parent, it is my responsibility to keep my children safe online. As long as Denise Coates is complying with her legal requirements in relation to responsible gambling, the rest of it, it's on us as parents to keep our children safe. Why are we pushing that responsibility elsewhere?
OK. Couldn't agree with that. And you're in the front here.
You mentioned safeguarding to do with children on gambling. What safeguarding measures do you suggest to put in place on websites such as Bet365?
Go on.
I was the Secretary of State that introduced the Internet Safety Strategy and started that process. As part of that, we put in age verification, for example, on pornography sites, because we do need to have really strict and rigorous ways to stop people who are not old enough to access those sites from accessing them. And I think more action that can be taken. I mean, actually, most of the gambling sites do have very good age verification on them anyway, but we need to make sure that there is proper age verification. And I do agree with the lady at the back about the responsibility of parents. This is the responsibility of all of us. The internet is not the Wild West, and we need to make sure that we all understand what is happening online, what our children are doing online. This is something we all have a responsibility for, but there are things that can be done by the sites themselves in terms of access.
The woman in the second row from the back there.
I think that it's all... I understand what you're saying about the internet, but it seems like you're blaming that for everything. Well, you've got to look at just the basic things like a football match that's on in the middle of the day, and the adverts that come on in between it. Gambling becomes normal to children. It is about education. We're talking about children because they will grow up to be adults who do have a problem. But we have got to look at... Let's have a watershed. Let's not have those adverts on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when there's, like, you know, loads and loads of teenage boys watching a football match, for example. And it's just basic things like that the government needs to take action instead of just keep talking about it.
Do you celebrate Denise Coates' success?
I do celebrate her success, and I think that why wouldn't you? She's running a business, and that has to be a good thing. It's not her responsibility to make the rules as to where she can advertise. It's down to the government, really. And we've just got to take some action. They've got to take responsibility and just say, right, we're not going to have this. TV is regulated massively. Why can't we just do the same during the daytime, before the watershed, with regard to gambling?
OK. Clive Lewis. And then just an answer to the question, essentially, but then we'll go on.
Yeah, the 55 poorest boroughs in this country have 4 times as many betting shops as the 150 most wealthy. We know that there are almost 2 million children now who are at danger of developing a gambling addiction. If you think about the fact that gambling, the modern gambling industry, preys in a large part on people's vulnerabilities. We've just had a debate in Parliament where the government were forced to do a U-turn. It took a government minister to resign to bring forward the fixed odd betting terminals of stake reduction from £100 to £2. And we worked out that would cost hundreds of lives for having that delay, and that was what Parliament forced on the government this week. I think you can see quite clearly that I have to ask myself the question, what kind of country do we live in where the highest paid chief executive in this country, who's paid an obscene amount, she may have made it, paid an obscene amount, what does that say about our country, that people are making money by preying on the vulnerabilities of people, including children? I think it's wrong. I think we need to... And this is I think what we need to have is... I think what Labour has said is that we want to have a whistle-to-whistle ban on live sporting events. And I also think that, as well, there are other checks and balances you can do to make sure that, so, for example, people can put blocks on their credit cards. If you look at some of the apps now that are out there, they're actually... Not only are they advertising on there from gambling, their gambling industry, but they're also, although there's no money being exchanged, it's teaching children the risks and rewards of gambling. So I think what we can understand is that, yes, people have a responsibility to look after their children, but we need to make sure it's a level playing field and that parents have a fighting chance to make sure their children don't go down that path.
David, hold on, back to Denise Coates. Celebrate Denise Coates or not?
I think it's an obscene amount of money. I think, given the fact that there are millions... Well, it's £265 million for one person. I think when you live in a society, an economy, where nurses are going to food banks and someone is paid £265 million, I find that obscene.
So what should Trevor Phillips.
with Clive and Spirit, but I think it would be unfair to leave this discussion without pointing out that the reason Denise Coates' company raised that enormous amount of money, but I agree with the lady who said about parents, the reason you raised that amount of money is because in China and some other countries, they ban online betting. She spotted that opportunity, and that is where they made the big money. So I don't think we should leave this thinking Denise Coates has been, you know, exploiting children. I think that would be very unfair.
Yeah. I just want to go back to the questioner, yes. You've heard all of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea if Denise Coates actually evidenced the social responsibility that the company should have.
What do you mean by that?
So, well, the well-being of young people, and
she has a charity that gives money to.
No, as a company, she has got a social responsibility to.
Right. So you'd like to see the kind of thing we've been hearing about children and gambling. You'd like to see her.
I would like to see her
make sure that doesn't happen.
She does actually invest some money in the research and care, but I think it's a fraction of what she's actually earning.
Okay. Right, let's go on. Thomas Kay, can we have your question? Thomas Kay.
1 in 200 Britons are sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation. How has this been allowed to happen?
These are the latest figures that have come out. 1 in 200 sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation. Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Well, I mean, it's not 1 in 200 sleeping rough, it's 1 in 200 who are technically homeless and they don't have permanent accommodation.
His words were sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation.
Yes, but it's in temporary accommodation.
But that was his question.
Yeah. Exactly, but those are two very, very different things. People who've got a roof over their head and people who don't. I think we could all agree those are quite different things. The vast, vast majority of those people do have a roof over their head. I think it's ridiculous and absurd. There are a number of different reasons why it's happening. One, we don't build enough houses. No one's built enough houses for decades. We need to build more houses that people can afford rather than just, I don't know, rich Russians coming over here to have yet another home. We need to build more social housing. We need to stop selling off the social housing we have at a massive discount without replacing it. I would say stop selling it off entirely. But we also need to make councils actually act rather more quickly than they do when people do need accommodation, because in a lot of these scenarios, people are in private accommodation, but they get housing benefit. They're told by the landlord the rent's going up, they can't afford it anymore, they have to move out. Often they get 3 months' notice, a month's notice. But the councils pretty much do a policy, have a policy where they say, until you're actually evicted, we won't deal with you. We're not going to help you get accommodation. We won't deal with you until the moment the bailiffs actually arrive. So they wait until there's a crisis to then put people in temporary accommodation when there's a crisis. We could easily solve an awful lot of this by councils simply acting sooner in a rather more orderly fashion so that people, especially families, especially with young children at school, aren't forced to move from temporary shelter to B&B to another bit of temporary accommodation. So there are a million different things that can be done. I would say this is one of the top priorities probably for most people in this country. It'd be lovely to get Brexit out of the way so we could get on top of some of these issues.
The woman in the back there. Yes. Madam.
I work within the social housing sector. I've worked for 22 years in the social housing sector. I see a lot of properties on our high streets, shops, shop front, they've got property over the top. Why aren't the bigger companies investing and converting those properties into accommodation? It can become the good old-fashioned 2 up, 2 down, 1-bedroom property to give people a foot on the property ladder.
Where do you see that? In Cannock or where?
You've got it in Cannock, the High Street in Cannock, the High Street in Brown Hills, the High Streets in Stafford, Hensford. All the local towns have got properties that are absolutely falling derelict and looking atrocious. We can be turning them into decent homes for people to get them on the property ladders.
Who would do that? The council or the...
It could be the councils, it could be social housing landlords, it could be bigger builders, it could be small property developers. Why are we building on greenbelt land, taking the land away where our children can't go and play and give them that exercise to keep them fit and utilise what's falling into dereliction?
Trevor.
I would give my time to that lady because what she said is exactly right. It's probably the most important thing we could do. One of the things that practically we could do to achieve that is to, first of all, speed up the change of use, the planning regime, so we can get a change of use. Because one of the things that's happening, and we know this from the retail sector, is that our high streets are not ever again going to be what they were. You go to any town and there are toothless high streets where there are stores, independent stores that were there forever that have now closed down. But nobody can afford nobody can afford business rates to put new businesses in there. So actually, I think this would be a smart thing to do to make it, as well as what the government's recently done, which is to allow local councils to borrow more, to allow them to speed up the planning process so there's change of use. The other thing, which I think, in answer to the gentleman's question, we need to remember why some of the people who are on the streets are there. They're not just there because there's not housing. They're there because of drugs. They're there because of the experiences they've had. And one of the particular things that I myself am always concerned about is the problem of veterans who have come back from one or other war and for all sorts of reasons find themselves completely unable to cope with the life that they've come back to. And we see too many of those, mainly young men, on our streets. And
sorry, but are you... I mean, I understand that problem, but are you saying that those people can't be accommodated or that they are not able to be accommodated because of their state of mind, that they choose what they do?
I'm saying that the reason that they're on the street isn't just about not having a roof. It's about a whole series of other things, and we frankly just need to spend whatever it takes to get those boys into a place where they are safe.
All right. Man in the back row, in the second row from the back there, yes.
I think in every answer so far, we've had somebody mention councils and the work that councils could do in order to help homelessness. And it's quite clear what the problem is here: chronic underfunding of public services and our local authorities. And this has been a problem ever since this government got in power and started forward with its harsh and inhumane policy of austerity, as the UN pointed out this week. Now, if actual money was put into our public services, maybe this issue wouldn't have got as bad as it has.
The woman there in the fourth row, there, yes?
So I totally get your point about the it not being connected just to social housing. I think when we think about the fact that schemes such as Future Jobs Funds and employment initiatives to get people back into employment have been demised recently, but also the announcement today in terms of mental health services and the waiting time for mental health services. If there was a quicker process for people to get that support, they wouldn't be ending up on the street.
Yeah. And Karen Bradley, can you answer the previous point about austerity and the imposition of austerity has led to this, that the gentleman said, and that the UN condemned this week?
Well, austerity is not a choice. It was something that we had to deal with.
Sorry, why was it not a choice?
Because we were in financial difficulties as a country and we needed to get our finances back in order.
But hang on, it was your choice. It may not have been a choice for you. People who oppose you obviously saw it as a choice that you made.
But it was something that had to be done in order that we could deal with the deficit that we inherited. And it's been difficult, no one denies it. And that's why at the conference a few months ago, the Prime Minister said that in the next spending review, we would start to show the British people the sacrifices they've made, because the British people have made sacrifices. But on the point of homelessness, and I think the point has been alluded to by many, there's not one simple reason why people end up in this situation. It's very complicated, and there'll be individual reasons for each person. For the military and for veterans, you probably missed the debate on the military covenant today that was going on in Parliament because there were some other things people were looking at. But we had a debate on that because, absolutely, we have to make sure that the military covenant is applied and that veterans are looked after. We need to make sure there is mental health services.
That's why money, though, Karen.
That's why there was money. And that's why there was £2 billion announced in the budget for mental health services.
Thomas Kay's question was, how has it been allowed to happen?
We need
now
to
you're
make
talking
sure...
about how you're going to solve these things, proposing to, but why was it allowed to happen in the first place?
We have to solve the problem that we face today. And
why was it allowed to happen in the first place, was the question.
Well, as we said, there's many reasons why people end up in that situation. There's no one simple reason why it happens that you can just click the button and it would all change. There's lots of different things. You need to understand those problems. You need to understand the reasons. But we also announced at conference £1.2 billion to go into helping people who are homeless and finding them accommodation, to make sure that as much work can be done. And I think the lady who talked about the high street is absolutely right. And that was another thing that was announced at the budget, a future high streets fund, so that high streets, we can look, we have to accept that we can't preserve the high street in Aspic, although I have to say that the high streets in Leek and Biddulph in my constituency are wonderful places and you all should come and visit them.
Would it not also be an idea that if we're going to invite another 4.5 million people into the country, we might build some more homes to accommodate them as well?
Richard Walker.
Well, firstly, on high streets, the biggest thing you could do is address this ridiculous imbalance between an outdated Victorian tax, which is namely business rates, whilst the online players... I could rant all night about that, but to Thomas's question, the statistics are real. We see it in the 900 high street communities that we serve up and down the country. There's now 1.5 million people destitute in this country. There is a third of children living in poverty, and I lay a big part of the blame at universal credit. When in business we do transition, we always overfund it because we need to make sure that the transition is smooth.
What does do transition mean in layman's
language? Well, and it changed from one system to another. And when Osborne cut over £3 billion from the universal credit payments, I think that was the exact opposite that he should have done. And I think the results are clear to see, and the rollout has been shambolic. The other thing is obviously, and I think this is a big reason which is causing some of what we're seeing around the high streets, is this idea of a monthly payment, which is a very middle-class idea. We pay all of our frontline staff weekly in arrears, and I think that is a huge change for many people who've been used to weekly payments to suddenly cash flow onto one monthly payment.
Yep. Let's come back to... Let's come back to the question, how has it been allowed to happen that 1 in 200 Britons are sleeping rough or in temporary accommodation? That was the question.
Well, Karen Bradley says there's not a simple solution for destitution and poverty. There is. It's called the Conservative Party. It's called austerity. It's called the cuts that have happened for the past 8 years. In my own city, I went to visit the prison service, and the prison governor is handing prisoners backpacks, homelessness backpacks, so that they can sleep on the streets. We've got 5,380 social homes that were completed last year and a waiting list for council houses of 1.2 million. And that is on the watch of this Conservative government. You say that there was no choice. Austerity was a political choice. You've given £110 billion away in corporate tax cuts to the largest, wealthiest corporations, and yet at the same time you now have a UN report saying that there are millions of people who are destitute, 1.5 million. It's a disgrace, it's a scandal, and you cannot fob it off on 8 years ago for a financial crash that hit the entire globe.
Okay.
No, you can't.
Karen Bradley, we're coming to the end. You literally have 30 seconds. You've said what you've said, but you can just briefly answer him and then we must stop.
The record is that there are 1 million fewer people living in absolute poverty today compared to 2010.
Change the
there are
figures.
630... fewer. There are 630 fewer children living in workless households as a result of the changes that this government has put through. Now, I said that there have been difficult decisions that needed to be taken, and the British people have worked very hard to get to the point where we can say that austerity is coming to an end. And I'm very pleased we can say that, because we do need to make sure that we deliver on what the British people need. And I think Julia made the point, let's get the deal on Brexit, let's get that dealt with, and let's move on.
That's not what I said.
Right. Anyway, it's rather curious to talk about the British people have worked very hard when half of them disagree with you. But anyway, that's up to you. Our time's up. Next Thursday, we're going to be in Penzance. On Question Time next Thursday, we have Rebecca Long-Bailey and we have the poet Benjamin Zephaniah coming down to Cornwall. And the week after that, we're in Bishop Stortford. Now, on the screen is the number to call, 0330 123 9988, if you'd like to be in either audience, or you can go to the website and follow the instructions there, and that may be a simpler way of doing it. If you want to go on talking about the things we've been talking about here tonight, Adrian Childs is on Question Time Extra Time on 5 Live right now. But my thanks to this panel. Thank you for listening to our audience here. Thank you, our audience, for coming here to Cannock to take part. I'm sorry for those of you who didn't get in but wanted to, but that's the way it is. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
How are families coping as they wait for support from the government's new universal credit? Panorama follows one council as they adapt to the